Hey guys, we're working on the Chevrolet C4500 Kodiak medium duty truck today. Going to be doing a brake job. Some of the tools we've got there, 30mm socket with a heavy impact. New set of brake pads. That's the part number. We picked these up at O'Reilly's. I think they're about 120 on the list, or 80 bucks if you got a commercial account. We've got 8 of those 30mm studs. Once you get that outside wheel off, you'll probably have to take a mini sledge and pound on that inner tire a little bit to get it to break loose. There are 4 points on that hub where this thing sets centered, and sometimes you can get a little rust on there. Makes it tough to get that inner wheel out. Obviously, before we start, a couple of safety things. Make sure you've got a floor jack that's ready to hold that truck. Once we do get those wheels and tires off, we're gonna throw a jack stand under that hub just as kind of a safety backup. We do have wheel chocks, as you can see on the other side of the truck, to keep it from rolling. We're on a flat surface here, so that shouldn't be an issue. And we've got the parking brake set. So we've got our wheels pulled off, got our jack stand in place there. You're gonna need a 16mm wrench, preferably a ratchet wrench to get in here. This upper one is pretty tight between the springs. There's a second one on the bottom. Once you get those loosened up, what I like to do is take a big flathead screwdriver and kind of pry it in between the caliper and the pad itself to get you some gap and push those pistons back into those calipers. Once you get them off, you can take a couple of pair of large channel locks like this, because this is a dual piston caliper, and kind of slowly squeeze those pistons all the way back in flush. So when we put the new pads on, we've got plenty of room to work. All right, so we've got the caliper loose. I'll show you guys in here. The way these are designed, they've got this tab at the top. If you can see this here now, this one is bent up now. We've got new holders that have come with our new pads here. These are bent down in place when you slip that caliper and these pads on. And so it's helpful if you bend this tab up on the top and on the bottom here to get that caliper to loosen up and to slide out of there. These are pretty rusty, as you can see, so it was a little bit of a bear to get out. I'll tell you, this thing is extremely heavy. This is a dual piston caliper. Make sure that you've got this thing supported either with a bungee cord, or you can set it up on a block so that you don't put any undue stress on that brake line. You can see the attachment points right there. We don't want to have to deal with a secondary repair. So we're gonna pull these off, pull the old clips out. We're gonna brake clean all this, knock off some rust. We're gonna go ahead and paint these hubs when we've got it down, clean up these studs, and put a little paint on this wheel so everything looks good when we put this back together. All right, so we've got everything de-rusted. Went ahead and painted that hub. I like to keep things clean and tidy. I find that it's easier to spot a leak on a piece of machinery if you keep everything kind of cleaned up and painted and degreased. I did go ahead and knock off the rust on the caliper as well as these brackets here, and you can see we've added some of that non-squeak material. You could use axle grease if you don't have any of that brake grease material here that you can get at your auto parts store. I have found that if you'll grease these, the front side of the cups on your pistons there, as well as the holders that are going to go into place, it's pretty good bet that you're not going to have a squeak on these brakes. At least I never have. I will tell you on these new brake holders here, they send you with a new set, these little brackets that sit up there on your hardware. There is a slight difference, if you can see that, from the top and the bottom. This one's a little bit longer, so make sure that you get this on the bottom and this on the top. One of them won't go the other way. So we're gonna do a time lapse, put all this back together real quick. I'll tell you the other thing I did on the hub here was I went ahead and added some axle grease where my wheels slide on in this spot here. Makes it a little bit easier instead of fighting those things to get them up on there. And on your brake pads, I did go through this issue. There are many sub-models on these Kodiak trucks, depending on whether you're air brakes, hydraulic brakes, is it just a work truck model, or, you know, kind of one of the high-end issues. We did have to go through 3 sets of brake pads before we found the right set for this truck. So it might be worth it to crawl under the truck, take a picture of the back of your caliper. You can kind of get the outline of the brake pad there before you go to your parts store. Especially on these old medium duty trucks. A lot of these are special order because not a lot of them out there in comparison to all the other cars that are running around today. Might save you a headache from having to take your truck apart more than once. I'm going to walk you guys through these brake pads real quick. If you noticed on that time lapse, I was having a pretty hard time here. What I didn't notice, that maybe you can see here, is that this is spring loaded. So when you go to put this pad in, you're going to want to release that a little bit. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get that to slide on because the pad hits the front of this tab here. Hey guys, remember we talked about these tabs right here when we took this thing apart on top? It's handy to have a heavy hammer. I would be cautious to smack that with a sledge very hard. I did tap on mine with a 2-pound hammer in order to get those things to kind of clip up in there. The other thing is when you stick that pad on, I mentioned that, pull that tab back, make sure those things are in there flat. I did squeeze the pistons back in the calipers, but I didn't go far enough, so I had to kind of finagle that a little bit with a flathead screwdriver. But once I got it into place, I'd encourage you to start whichever bolt you can as quickly as you can, because this thing is extremely heavy, especially working in this tight space. Take your hammer, tap those dudes into place, get your pins back up underneath there. Everything should line up no problem. We're going to go ahead and throw the wheels back on it, torque these down, and then mark our studs. All right guys, so we got both of our wheels and tires back on here. Got the studs on, excuse me, the lug nuts. Make sure you always tighten those in a crisscross pattern. The other thing we did was we make sure we had both of those wheels up snug on the hub here so that there's no gap. Otherwise your wheels and tires are not gonna run true. They'll kind of be out of balance. So we've got those good and flat against the hub. We've tightened these in an alternating pattern. Usually I go back and forth across. So if you're at 3 o'clock, you go to 9 o'clock and then you step one lug and just work your way around there. After we've tightened them down once, we'll go back and check them a second time. It's a good idea to know your torque spec on your truck to get those accurate. Last thing we're gonna do is take a paint pen, something similar to this, and we're gonna mark out those studs on the wheel so that if we have a lug nut loosen up, it'll catch your eye pretty quick just on weekly maintenance. Other thing I'll mention if you're not used to running a dual truck is to make sure you get the holes lined up on the front and the back. You can kind of see right up here on this one, we've got daylight through there. So we can reach our bow stem on our back rim if we need to air that tire up. As always, thanks for watching. Shoot me a comment. If you got a question on something, I'll try to help you out.